Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Father Kevin Joyce, priest of the Diocese of San Jose. I teach at St. Patrick's Seminary, where I also serve as a spiritual director. Some of you already know me because I served here at St. Catherine's for 4 years, from 1980 to 1984. And I was amazed at the last few Masses. I've seen so many people who still come to St. Catherine's that I knew 40 years ago. So I think the moral of the story is, if you want to live long, live in Morgan Hill and come to St. Catherine's. After I left St. Catherine's, the bishop sent me to serve as a teacher and spiritual director at St. Joseph's College, which at that time we had as a minor seminary in Mountain View. It fell down in the earthquake in '89. One of the first students who came to me for spiritual direction was a young 20-year-old seminarian from Mexico. He didn't speak a word of English. I thought to myself, oh man, this guy is going to be a real challenge. And now that challenging student has been a priest for more than 25 years and is your pastor. Yeah, Father Gerardo's story makes me believe in miracles.
He was my professor, so he's to blame.
In today's gospel, we hear about the first miracle worked by Jesus. Although St. John, the evangelist, does not use the word miracle, rather the word sign. Listen again to John's commentary after Jesus changed the water into wine. Jesus did this at the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. So the purpose of these signs of Jesus, then and now, is to reveal himself, reveal his glory, and to lead us to believe in him more deeply, and to be empowered by him. You see, Jesus continues to work signs among his people, not only 2,000 years ago in Israel. Everyone who comes to know Jesus Christ personally and follow him experiences signs of his presence, mercy, and power. As many of you, I've been blessed by Jesus' signs throughout my life. Throughout my priestly ministry, I will periodically relate some of those signs in my homilies, and people have been telling me for years, you ought to write down some of these stories. I tell a lot of stories in my homilies. And I've also been blessed by knowing some great spiritual masters and by reading the wisdom of great saints. So I decided a few years ago I was going to write a book about these mentors, these masters, these saints that have helped me, because I know they will help other people. So I mentioned that to a friend of mine, a Jewish friend who's published a lot of books. He said, don't write that book. There's all kinds of books out there about gurus and masters. And no, people want to hear a story. Tell your story and how those spiritual masters and mentors and saints have impacted your life story. I said, well, I'll give it a try. So I went down to the monastery in Big Sur, the Camaldolese monastery, for 3 summers in a row. And the monks gave me a hermitage for a month each summer. And I just sat and typed, and I couldn't stop. It just flowed out of me. So after 3 summers, I had about 300 pages. I said, that's enough. And I only reached age 30. So I'm kind of telling kind of like an autobiography. It's basically a spiritual memoir. And it's now published. It's called Surprised by Grace, a spiritual journey from west to east and back. Because part of the story is I spent several years seriously investigating the Asian meditation traditions. I said, well, why are so many people looking to Buddhist meditation or Hindu meditation? What is the draw? So I really looked deeply into it. And in the book, I do a fair amount of a comparison and contrast that I think is fair to both sides. Anyway, the book I really wrote for non-believers. Now, you believers, I think you would enjoy the book too, but I wrote it for people who are feeling distant from God or maybe don't even believe in God, they're agnostic, and a lot of people have disaffiliated from Christianity over the last number of years. And I'm trying to reach them with this book by telling a number of signs, stories that I think are pretty convincing about the reality of who Jesus is and what he offers anyone who opens up their heart to him. So after Mass, if you're interested, you can buy the book for $15. I'm not taking any proceeds from the sale. Instead, the proceeds will be donated to Father Gerardo. And no, I'm donating them to St. Catherine's Faith Formation Programs. And if you'd like me to sign the book, I'll be out there doing so. I'm going to share with you one story from the book that dramatically describes a sign Jesus worked in the life of my family. If you or someone you know have serious doubts about your faith or are feeling distant from God, this story is especially for you. My brother Brian and I were very close as children. When we reached our 20s, Brian underwent a big change. In his first 20 years, he was a very happy kid, very creative. He was always the most popular kid in the class. And he had hemophilia, which is a disease of the blood. And in those days, the only way to deal with it was to get a transfusion when there was some internal bleeding. And, he suffered a lot over the years. And all the hemophiliacs of his generation contracted the AIDS virus from tainted blood in the transfusions. So his suffering with hemophilia and then with AIDS, plus this preacher he started listening to on TV, who was anti-Catholic and a firebrand fundamentalist, a preacher, led Brian to abandon the Catholic faith. So little by little, Brian just kind of withdrew from all his early sources of life and joy and connection. And during his final 3 years of life, he isolated himself from family. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't talk to my mom. And one day in the end of 1997, when I was pastor at St. Maria Goretti, and Father Gerardo was the parochial vicar, I was his boss at that time. Now he's kind of my boss. So I got this call from a nurse saying, "Your brother is dying. You need to see him." I said, "I've tried for 3 years. He won't see me. But I'm going to do everything possible." I was totally shaken up, by this news. And I went down to his apartment in Alameda. He wouldn't open the door. So I was so filled with anxiety and worry that I thought of St. Paul, the most stubborn of all the saints. My brother was just so stubborn at this time in his life. He wasn't open to any human intervention. Paul wasn't open to any human intervention. There had to be direct divine intervention from Jesus that changed this persecutor of Christianity into one of the greatest saints we've ever seen. So I said, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pray. We're going to get a campaign of people praying for Brian for direct intervention from Jesus, and St. Paul is going to be the ringleader of this campaign. So I asked St. Paul for his intercession for my brother. So we did this for a couple of weeks, and beginning of 1998, Charles Peoples dropped by the rectory one day with a gift from Rosemarie, who worked here as Faith Formation Director. And I asked him and Rosemarie to join in the prayer campaign. And of course, Charles said yes. And he recommended that in our prayer for Brian, we imagine Jesus as the good shepherd holding the lost sheep. I was really touched by his recommendation. So when Charles left, I knew that I had a painting of the Good Shepherd somewhere in my closet. And so I went into my room. I was looking all through the closet, couldn't find it. And I was very disappointed because I was just convinced that somehow God was speaking to me through Charles. Then I look at my watch. In 5 minutes, I have a wedding. So I go running across the parking lot to the church. I zoom into the sacristy. And there on the vesting table was this very beautiful pencil etching of Jesus the Good Shepherd holding a lost sheep. And at the bottom of the etching were these words: "If you wander away, he will always search for you and will gladly welcome you back." I asked the sacristan, "Who left this etching on the table here?" He said, "Nobody's been in the sacristy, only himself." Have you ever had a God moment where you just knew God was right there? Well, that was a God moment. I don't know how that etching got there, but I know that God sent it. And he sent it to confirm that we just need to hang in there in this prayer campaign for my brother, not to lose faith. On January 25th, Brian suddenly and dramatically changed. He called my mother and asked her to come to his apartment. Now they hadn't talked in 3 years. When she arrived, he wept and begged forgiveness for his hostility and hardness of heart. He also said, "I want to see my brother." When my mom phoned me with this amazing news, I was overjoyed beyond belief. I drove to Alameda to his apartment. I entered his bedroom, and I was shocked because he had very advanced AIDS. I mean, he was just skin and bones. And he looked very serious. And I sat down in front of him. He was sitting on the bed. I sat in a little chair. And he said from the depths of his heart, "Kev, please forgive me." And I, without blinking, responded, "Brian, please forgive me." Because I, too, had harbored anger and resentment toward him because of the way he had been treating me and my parents. At that moment, every negative feeling I had toward my brother instantaneously vanished. Never in my life have I experienced such profound, sudden, and permanent reconciliation with another human being. The sense of deep love that we had when we were children in our early, just immediately resurfaced. A few days later, I was reflecting over this amazing, beautiful experience we had and I realized that this conversion of my brother, this amazing change, and change in me too, happened on January 25th. Does anyone here remember what feast day we celebrate in the Catholic Church on January 25th? Anybody remember? Father Gerardo? Deacon Phil? The conversion of St. Paul. The conversion of St. Paul. When I realized that, wow, it was in another God moment. Here, we've been praying for several weeks, this big prayer campaign for my brother. St. Paul's leading the campaign, and the change that we've been praying for happened on the feast day when we celebrate the conversion of St. Paul. I mean, it was an amazing moment of grace. And it further convinced me of what I had already experienced many times in my life, that Jesus continues to work signs of power now in our day. For almost 3 months, Brian, was in bed, had a lot of pain, but he was joyful. It was just amazing. There was this complete change. He'd become like he was when he was a kid, full of good humor, told jokes, sang songs, he prayed with us, and many of us who were visiting him and caring for him, we got so much more from him than we were giving him. So, and one of our parishioners here, Lita Hall, who's a nurse, went quite often from Morgan Hill to Alameda to help care for my brother. As we entered Holy Week, we could see that Brian didn't have long to live. I turned over my parish responsibilities to Father Gerardo, and I stayed with my mom and my brother. On Easter Sunday morning, Brian was in severe pain. Lita was caring for him that day. And she asked me to bring her Holy Communion. Now remember, my brother had been out of the church for years, hostile toward the Catholic Church. And one of our petitions had been during the prayer campaign that he would return to the Catholic Church and return to the sacraments. So anyway, Lita asked me to bring her Holy Communion. I did. After I gave her Holy Communion, I said to Brian, "Would you like to receive the body of Christ?" He replied with great emotion, "Yes, I would. Yes, I would." And after receiving the Eucharist for the first time in many years, he said, Kev, thanks so much for that. Thanks so much for that. This was the moment of his return to the Catholic Church and his return to sacramental life on Easter Sunday, which ended up being the last day of his life. Because the very next morning, very peacefully, he died. Ending this homily with a narration of Brian's last months of life brings into vivid relief the truth that Jesus continues to work signs of his mercy and power now in the lives of his people, in the lives of all those who put their trust and confidence in him. Even in the most painful happenings of our lives, for those with hearts filled with faith in the God who created us, we can experience the reality of grace and the invincibility of love.